So finally, Christmas Eve, a time when we celebrate the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. But it's 2024, and we have to start, I think, by grieving just a little bit. Because Bethlehem was located in Palestine, of course. Jesus was Palestinian. And for the past 14 months, the Western world, including Canada, has been supporting an apartheid state to commit a genocide in Palestine. Now, I know many of you came tonight with a certain image of what it means to be in a manger, but we're faced with a disturbing contrast. And we will end with something happier, trust me. But most of us probably bring in our minds an idyllic picture of Jesus being born in a stable, like the one on the screen, in a calm and peaceful country. Mary and Joseph were content and well-fed. Their biggest problem was that there was no room in the inn and they had to sleep in a barn. That's the image of the Nativity most of us probably carry in our heads. But if Jesus were born today, in 2024, he would be born on a pile of rubble. If Jesus were born today, he'd be born to parents who are starving because of our racist and deliberate program to intentionally starve about 2 million Palestinians to death. By the way, the image on the right is from a church in Bethlehem, from the Lutheran Church in Bethlehem. That's the nativity they set up last year. Now, don't worry, I won't give you a long history lesson now. But in very brief summary, today we have to make a decision. Do we want to live in a world where might makes right? Or do we want to live in a world where human rights and justice actually matter? Do we want to live in a world where human beings, children of God, actually matter? Or to put it in democratic terms, do we believe in the rule of law? Or do we think that people with money and power should be able to act with impunity, even if it means the death of millions of people? But in a strange way, that question actually brings Christmas to the here and now. Jesus, 2,000 years ago, was born into a Roman occupation and oppression. And Jesus, if born today, would be born into an Israeli occupation and oppression. The fight about power versus justice is a very old and ongoing fight. But Jesus invites us to live into a world where human rights and justice actually matter. Jesus invites us to live in a world of peace. And in spite of being born in a place of oppression himself, Jesus lived his life and invites us to live our lives, always in a way that trends towards justice and peace. So I wanted to symbolize this evening with something that wouldn't take too long either. So hang on. Just happen to have a handy keffiyeh here. So I'm going to give it to Jesus. But just in case you haven't seen these before, the symbolism on the keffiyeh, you got the bold lines. These represent trade routes. And they were important not only for economic trade, but cultural trade, because Palestine has always been, until recently, a very diverse population, ethnically, religiously, and every other way. Yeah, the fishing nets that are linked to the fish and the sea itself, the Mediterranean Sea, and the olive branches that speak to the resilience, determination, and dedication of the people. So I'm going to give this to Jesus, I think. He did look a little chilly. I have to say, Christmas Eve only comes once a year, but I feel like I live into this event a few times a year myself, because Christmas Eve services always remind me of weddings. There are differences, of course. For example, I think the budget for this little wedding might be slightly higher than our budget for this evening service. But the main similarity for me between Christmas Eve services and weddings is this. Both Christmas Eve services and weddings point to something that is vastly more important than the service itself. And we can completely miss that if we're not paying attention or if we've had a bit too much eggnog. I mean, consider weddings. Weddings can be a lot of fun, right? They can be great opportunities for families and friends to come together, celebrate love. Weddings are usually these little bubbles of perfection, right? The perfect dress, perfect table centers, the perfect minister, obviously. And most weddings happen in the space of a day. Now, I love weddings, but the reality is weddings are really not very important compared with what comes after the wedding. I mean marriage. Because marriage is the long-term, slow-burn, living life in partnership with another person. Marriage is about the ups and downs, highs and lows of life, making mistakes and creating forgiveness in our midst. Marriage is about living in actual, imperfect reality in ways that include love, joy, fear, pain, sorrow, grief, and everything else we call the human condition. Weddings are great, but marriage is much more important. And you could attend 100 weddings and learn absolutely nothing about marriage. And consider Christmas Eve services. Christmas Eve services can be a lot of fun. They can be great opportunities for family and friends to come together, to sing, to celebrate love. I love Christmas Eve services. But at the same time, Christmas Eve services are just not very important when compared with what comes after. A little thing called normal life and faith. Because faith is about how we live our lives, how we become better human beings, how we live, cope, and thrive with the ups and downs of life while making mistakes and creating forgiveness in our midst, how we live in community with others in actual imperfect reality that includes love, joy, fear, pain, sorrow, grief, and everything else we call the human condition. The irony kind of is that we talk about those important aspects of life, faith, healing, and hope 51 weeks a year in this church. But tonight we don't do that. Tonight we celebrate in ritualized form the mythological stories of the birth of Jesus. And I hope we all enjoy it. But the reality is you could attend 100 Christmas Eve services and learn nothing important about the Christian faith. Now, I like singing Christmas carols as much as the next person, but the essence of Christian faith is not just believing in a bunch of impossible things. The essence of faith is about healing and wholeness, both for us as individuals and us as a community. The point of faith is how we deal with real life. So it doesn't matter whether or not we believe these stories we're reading and singing about the shepherds and the magi and all that. What matters is how we treat each other and how we treat ourselves the rest of the year. So tonight, sing your lungs out. Enjoy the beauty of the season and the heartwarming rituals. But come back on normal Sundays too, when we actually discuss how to bring love into the world and how to bring love into our own hearts. Merry Christmas and blessings to you all and your families, and a Happy New Year. Amen.